Moscow, Idaho, a small college town of roughly 25,000 people, the kind of place where people don't lock their doors, where the last murder on record was 5 years prior. On the morning of November 13, 2022, 4 University of Idaho students were found stabbed to death in their off-campus rental home on King Road. Kaylee Goncalves, 21, Madison Mogan, 21, Zana Kernodle, 20, Ethan Chapin, 20. 2 other roommates were asleep on the floor below. They survived. No weapon was found. No suspect was named. No arrest came. For 6 weeks. In the hours and days that followed, the case became something the internet could not let go of. Every detail was dissected. Every theory was floated. Fear spread through the university until nearly half of Idaho's 11,000 students left campus and switched to online classes. And then, on December 30th, 2022, at 3 in the morning, officers knocked on a door in Pennsylvania. The man who answered was Bryan Christopher Kohberger, 28 years old, a PhD student in criminal justice and criminology. This is how they found him, and what the evidence showed. Before the investigation, before the arrest, before this case became one of the most followed true crime stories in years, there were 4 people. Kaylee Goncalves was from Rathdrum, Idaho. She was a senior. Her friends described her as bold, fiercely loyal, someone who made people feel seen. She and Madison Mogan had been best friends for years. They were together the night they died. Madison Mogan was from Coeur d'Alene, Idaho. She and Kaylee were inseparable. In the last photo Kaylee posted on Instagram, the day before the murders, they're together. Zana Kernodle was from Post Falls, Idaho. She lived in the house with Kaylee and Madison. Her boyfriend, Ethan Chapin, had come to stay that night. Ethan Chapin was from Conway, Washington. He was a twin. He played on the university crew team. He and Zana had been together for about a year. All 4 were active in Greek life at the university. All 4 were in their 20s, with everything ahead of them. The house on King Road was a typical off-campus rental. 3 floors, 6 bedrooms, shared between 6 women total. The 2 surviving roommates were on the ground floor and were unharmed. Investigators determined that whatever happened in that house took place on the 2nd and 3rd floors, sometime in the early morning hours of November 13th. No one called 911 until nearly noon the following day. The 911 call came in at 11:58 a.m. It was placed from inside the house by one of the surviving roommates. The caller described an unconscious person. When Moscow police officers arrived, they found 4 victims. All had been stabbed. The cause of death in each case was later confirmed as homicide. What they did not find was a murder weapon. That absence of a weapon would become one of the defining facts of the entire investigation. What investigators did find, later documented in a probable cause affidavit, was a knife sheath. A sheath for a K-bar fixed-blade knife left on the bed of one of the victims. That sheath would become central to the case. In the days that followed, the Moscow Police Department faced intense public pressure. No suspect, no motive offered, no arrest. The university installed emergency blue light phones across campus. Students were advised not to walk alone at night. Local gun shops reported a surge in sales. And online, the speculation was already running far ahead of the facts. Every detail that leaked, every rumor, every theory, was amplified. People who had nothing to do with the case were named publicly and harassed. Moscow police issued unusually pointed statements warning the public about misinformation. Meanwhile, investigators were doing something very specific and very patient. They were following the DNA. The knife sheath recovered from the scene had DNA on it. Law enforcement officials confirmed that DNA evidence played a key role in identifying the suspect. Investigators were able to match genetic material recovered from the scene to a specific individual. That individual was Bryan Kohberger, but DNA alone didn't lead them to him. The trail was built from multiple directions at once. Cell phone data placed a white Hyundai Elantra in the area of the King Road house on the night of the murders. The car had been there before. Investigators documented that the same vehicle had been in the vicinity at least 11 times prior to November 13th. The probable cause affidavit described this as casing behavior. Surveillance footage from the area captured the Hyundai leaving the scene. A partial license plate and then a fuller description of the vehicle led investigators toward Washington State University in Pullman, just 10 miles from Moscow across the state line. Bryan Kohberger drove a white Hyundai Elantra. He was a first-semester PhD student in the Department of Criminal Justice and Criminology at WSU. He was also a teaching assistant for the same department. When investigators ran his DNA against the sample from the knife sheath, it matched. Amazon purchase records subpoenaed during the investigation showed that Kohberger had ordered a K-bar knife and then deleted the purchase from his account history. On December 30th, 2022, exactly 6 weeks and 3 days after the murders, Pennsylvania State Police arrested Kohberger at his parents' home in Chestnut Hill Township, Monroe County. His attorney said Kohberger was calm at the time of arrest. He believes he would have been in Pullman at the time of the killings, the attorney stated. That position would define the next 2.5 years. Bryan Kohberger grew up in Pennsylvania. Quiet, socially awkward. Former classmates remembered him being bullied in school. Then something shifted. He started working out, lost weight, turned to psychology, then criminology, the study of how and why people commit crimes. By the time of the murders, he was a PhD student at Washington State University, 10 miles from Moscow, Idaho, across the state line. He taught criminal justice to undergraduates. His first semester had just ended. A fellow grad student would later tell the press that Kohberger always needed to be the smartest person in the room, that he explained simple things in the most complicated way possible, that he had to make sure you knew that he knew it. Days after the murders, he brought up the killings in conversation with a neighbor on his own. He said it looked like a crime of passion. He said police seemed to have no leads. At that point, publicly, that was true. But investigators were already working, and they had something. December 30th, 2022. 3 in the morning. Officers knock on a door in Pennsylvania, 6 weeks and 3 days after the murders. Kohberger opened the door. He was calm. His attorney would later say he was very aware but shocked by his arrest. He was extradited to Idaho, charged with 4 counts of first-degree murder and felony burglary. At his arraignment in May 2023, the judge asked how he pleaded. Kohberger said nothing. The court entered the answer for him: not guilty. What followed was 2 years of legal war. The defense challenged the DNA evidence methodology. They fought to take the death penalty off the table. They argued, successfully, that a fair trial was impossible in the small town of Moscow, where nearly everyone had a personal connection to the victims or the university. The case was moved to Boise, Ada County, a bigger city, a larger jury pool, more distance from the grief. The trial was scheduled 3 times: October 2023, then June 2025, then August 11th, 2025. Each time it was pushed back. Each time the families waited. Then, 6 weeks before the trial was set to begin, Kohberger walked into a Boise courtroom wearing a white shirt and blue tie. The judge asked, "Are you pleading guilty because you are guilty?" Kohberger said, "Yes." One word, after 2.5 years of silence. On July 23, 2025, Judge Stephen Hippler sentenced him to 4 consecutive life terms without the possibility of parole, 1 for each murder, plus 10 years for the burglary charge. The families spoke. The surviving roommates spoke. Kohberger declined to address the court. The judge noted on the record that the motive may never be fully known. On July 23, 2025, Kohberger appeared in court for sentencing. The families of all 4 victims made statements. Aliva Goncalves, Kaylee's sister, addressed Kohberger directly. She told him, "No one is scared of you today. No one is impressed by you. No one thinks you're important." The courtroom applauded when she finished. Scott Laramie, Madison Mogan's stepfather, remembered his daughter as someone who always brought us joy and who was taken senselessly and brutally in a sudden act of evil. Dylan Mortensen, one of the 2 surviving roommates, spoke publicly for the first time. She had been inside the house that night. The courtroom was silent when she stood up. Kohberger declined to speak. He told the judge he respectfully chose not to. Judge Hippler sentenced him to 4 consecutive life terms in prison without the possibility of parole, 1 for each murder, plus 10 years for the burglary charge, the maximum allowed. The judge noted on the record that Kohberger's motive may never be fully known. That sentence, may never be known, is the part of this case that stays with you longest. We know what he did. The DNA, the knife sheath, the deleted Amazon order, the cell phone data, his own guilty plea. We do not know why. The Idaho murders became a case about more than the crime itself. They became a case about what happens when a high-profile investigation plays out in real time on the internet. Before there is a suspect, before there is evidence, before there are answers. In the weeks between November 13th and December 30th, 2022, the online speculation around this case caused genuine harm to people who had nothing to do with it. Names were spread. Accusations were made. At least one person who was publicly named as a person of interest by online commenters had to come forward to deny any involvement. The Moscow Police Department, in an unusual move, issued multiple public statements specifically addressing misinformation. They asked people to stop. Most people did not stop. That is a pattern we have seen before in high-profile cases. It is a pattern that deserves to be named directly, because the people it hurts are real. There is also a separate and harder question about Kohberger himself. He studied the psychology of criminal behavior. He was, by academic training, someone who thought carefully about how and why crimes are committed. He understood forensic investigation, and yet the evidence against him was extensive, preserved, and ultimately decisive. The knife sheath with his DNA. The cell phone pings placing him at the scene. The purchase history he tried to erase. The car caught on surveillance. His own guilty plea. Whether his academic background played any role in his actions or in how he tried to cover them up is something investigators considered, but that was never fully explored at trial, because there was no trial. The families of the 4 victims remained divided about the plea deal. Some found relief in the certainty of the outcome. Others wanted a full trial, wanted every piece of evidence presented publicly, wanted the motive exposed, wanted something closer to a complete accounting. They did not get that. What they got was 4 consecutive life sentences and a man who said one word, yes, when asked if he was guilty. Kaylee Goncalves, Madison Mogan, Zana Kernodle, and Ethan Chapin were 20 and 21 years old. They were killed in the early morning hours of November 13, 2022, in a house they called home. The 2 roommates who survived were also in that house. They have had to carry that night with them ever since. Dylan Mortensen chose to speak at sentencing, her first public statement in nearly 3 years. That took something that is hard to name. Bryan Kohberger is 30 years old, he will spend the rest of his life in prison. He chose not to speak at the hearing where that was decided. Judge Hippler said the motive may never be known. That's the part of this case that the guilty plea didn't close. 4 people are gone. One person said yes when asked if he killed them, and the question of why remains open, not as a mystery to be solved online, but as a silence that belongs to the families of those 4 students. If you followed this case from the beginning, or you're learning about it for the first time, I'd like to know what you think. Was the plea deal the right outcome, or did the families deserve a full trial? Leave your thoughts in the comments. Subscribe for more deep dive cases told with verified facts, full context, and the details that actually matter. Stay curious, stay sharp, and I'll see you in the next one.